pleasure for me today to introduce Mynheer. Many of you will know him, you will certainly know his work. I know, for example, that a few of us have looked at his silent side in his while in the cathedral. Very, very moving. And what Nick is doing really epitomises for me the thing I was trying to get at when I set this particular series up, because what I'm asking of people is to express something that really is inexpressible. And yet with Nick you can see it, you can see that he has distilled as far as he can that essence which is so amazing, just a sense of God. But I'm sure he will demonstrate much better than I can say it, so welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a great delight to be here today, and I was very daunted when I saw the list of speakers that you've had, and almost said no to Georgie, but then I thought, no, I've really got to be brave. So I've avoided to come into any of the others because I knew that I wouldn't have the nerve to turn up today if I had done. Somebody very kindly pointed out to me moments ago that I'm not divine, so you won't see glimpses of the divine Nicholas Mynheer this morning. Sorry about that, that's my typesetting. Can you hear me all right?
Not quite, so I'm just going to go a bit the other side. Let's try that.
Is that better? Well, I'm not sure if it's the same for all artists, but for me, I think my art has been really inspired by my childhood. I had an unfashionably happy childhood, and I had a grandmother who lived in Leckford Road, just down the road, and which was terribly convenient because I lived in Horton-cum-Studley, where I still live. One of the few people that still that sort of live in the place that they were born and have grown up. But my grandmother in Leckford Road was terribly convenient because it was a short walk from Leckford Road to Port Meadow. I was very keen as a child on angling, so I'd regularly take my fishing rod and a little box of maggots down to Port Meadow and fish all day. It was probably at the age of about 8, or perhaps even younger than that, that I realised that it was possible to see past the glimmering reflections on the surface of the water and actually see underneath the water and see fish, which was jolly useful when you were an angler. But what was interesting is that some of my friends couldn't do that. They could only see the glimmering reflections on the top. And so I used to try to show them how to see past those and see the fish. It's one of those things that once you've done it, you always can do it. You never lose the ability to see the glimmering reflections and the fish underneath. I often think that life as a whole is like that. It's very easy to see all around us as the sort of glimmering reflections. It's actually quite difficult to see beyond it and see the divine and to see God. St. Luke says, "Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror, then shall we see face to face." And I suppose that as an adult and as an artist, I still endeavour to see past those glimmering reflections and to find the divine underneath. Elizabeth Barrett Browning says, and it's quoted beautifully on the poster for this series, "Earth's crammed with heaven, and every bush afire with God, but only he who sees takes off his shoes." I suppose what I try to do as an artist is show that what we think of as ordinary is extraordinary. To find that extraordinary in those things around us, the everyday things. Earth is indeed crammed with heaven. Every mother and child is Mary, the mother of God, with Jesus. every family of refugees, and God knows there's enough of them at the moment, are the Holy Family on the flight to Egypt. And even in the extraordinary moments, the most extraordinary moments, like for instance the resurrection, and here we see the Emmaus Supper on an altar I did recently for Murfield Priory in Yorkshire. Even the depictions of the extraordinary, we find the ordinary. A disciple here holding his head in abject horror, in fear and fright. What I thought I'd do today is to show you two projects that have taken up a lot of my life in the last few years. One that has been installed a couple of years now, and the other one I'm working on currently. And to try to show you how I combine what we might think of as ordinary with the extraordinary. And from a Christian perspective, to show that we still crucify Christ through our actions, but at the same time what happens to him happens to us. Firstly, a series of stained glass windows for Abingdon Boys' School. These are actually made in fused glass rather than stained glass. Stained glass, of course, is like these wonderful windows here, little bits of coloured glass, often painted, etched, and then leaded together. These windows I'm going to show you are made in fused glass, where all the glass is there's no painting, it's just made with glass fired over and over together. This project started off in about 2003, I think, and it started off with this window, the east window, the Trinity window, which the chapel is dedicated to the Holy Trinity. And having produced this window, it changed the use of the chapel. The chaplain told me that because of this bright, strong colour in the east, that they decided to leave the chapel doors open. They'd never left them open before. And because they'd opened the doors, boys went in. Extraordinary. And boys went into the chapel, otherwise they only went in when they really had to, I imagine. And they went in and they sat down in the chapel. This wasn't the result of my design or the production of the window, it was the fact that the doors were open. But the doors were opened because of the window. Shortly after that, a wonderful man called Hugh Randolph died, very sadly, and he left money, which was spent on making 2 more windows. Shortly after that, the headmaster at the time, and during this project, who went on so long, I got through 2 or 3 bursars, 2 headmasters, or was it 3? 2 headmasters, and 2 chaplains. But still the same artist, thank God. After that, we decided to produce a whole series of windows, and I had the idea that I would combine elements of school life with the church year, so that the boys could relate to what was in the windows. They could be used theologically for teaching, but they would also see the things that they loved doing. Rugby, hockey, running, I suppose schoolwork possibly, all those things combined. So I thought I'd just talk you briefly through the iconography. This was a Michaelmas term window. Now Michaelmas, of course, is the start of school life for the boys, and it's the term that leads up to Christmas. So we have the Nativity in the bottom. You'll have to take my word for it. The slides later are a bit clearer to see, but you'll have to take my word for it at the moment. The Nativity here. Christ is central in his swaddling bands, and here's the light source for the whole window, for the whole design. And above, Michael and all angels look down on the Nativity. In the upper left panel, John the Baptist. You can just make him out there. He's reaching his arms and reaching up, saying, "Make straight the path." Underneath, rugby being played. You see a a boy here in Abingdon colours holding a rugby ball. And even the rugby posts here point heavenward. This reflects my idea that we're not, that everything in the world is part, we're all joined together, and everything glorifies God in its own way, even the rugby posts. And underneath, you can just see there's a shadow, it's a shadow of a griffin, which is the school logo. On the other side, at the top, we have a medieval story of the Virgin Mary presenting a lamb to Edmund of Abingdon, but she's also presenting the Lamb of God to us. And underneath, the school choir. And through their music and through their singing, they glorify God, even though they almost certainly don't realise they're doing it as they do it. And a detail of the Holy Family. So you can see on this particular project, there's no leading, this is all one piece of glass, lots of layers of coloured glass laid on top of each other and fired together. I didn't make it myself, I worked with a wonderful lady up in Lancashire, who's the glass artist that turned my paintings into pure glass. Extraordinary, talented lady. Now, moving around the chapel, the Trinity window. As I said, the Trinity, the dedication of the chapel. In the centre, we see Jesus, his arms raised in the signs of the crucifixion, but also this is the risen Christ. His one eye looks directly out at each and every boy and says, "You are my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." I'm not sure that all the teachers would always say that, but for me this was Jesus looking out at each boy and loving them equally. The dove, the Holy Spirit, is the feathers have turned into sort of Pentecostal flames, and those flames go all the way around the chapel, and so even the monochromed windows have elements of colour, so they're not monochrome I suppose, that are flames, coloured flames that circle the chapel and encircle everybody. To the left, the Holy the Trinity, the Old Testament Trinity as it's called, which was meant to foretell the Trinity. Abraham entertaining, there he is, Abraham pouring wine for the three angels. And so I've taken the Old Testament story and I've turned the meal that Abraham served into the Eucharistic feast of blood, of wine and bread. And on the other side, a tree with a building, some buildings underneath. This represents the Holy City, or Abingdon School. The tree represents God, Christ, and the light comes through Christ, through the school and out to the rest of the world. The crescent moon above, a symbol of the Virgin Mary. Moving around the chapel, we go to the Lent term. This is when we celebrate Easter. We remember the death of Christ, and in this case, I've taken the cross out and made Jesus a cross shape. He is the cross. He has become the tree of life. And so we see this sort of fruit tree. He stands in the water, the Jordan. It's also the River Thames. It's the time when, during the school, they have their baptisms. And there's fish, you can barely see them, but this is very three-dimensional glass, and if you get the chance to go to Abingdon, I do ask you to go and see it and feel the glass. And then up on this side, there are three kings, actually on sort of donkeys, and they point up to the star above Jesus. The Magi are in there to remind us that they turned up much later than the Nativity. It took them some while to get there, so they probably took the best part of the term to arrive. Underneath, chess. That was in there because the school loved chess. The king, the queen. Bit of a tricky one. Do I make the queen the biggest because it was a headmistress, or would that play up to her? And so I didn't tell her this, but I did change the design around a bit and eventually decided to leave it as it was. When I did the original design, I presented them to their headmistress, and she pointed out to me that I'd forgotten, and all the things that I'd covered in rugby and swimming and rowing and all these wonderful things that the school does, the only thing I hadn't put in was academic work. And I was absolutely mortified, but this was clearly a reflection of my own schooling than it was a reflection of Abingdon School. So I dutifully put in boys doing academic work on sort of vague mixture of computers and books and things, because probably in 100 years' time we might have books, but whether we'll have computers I don't know. But balanced against that, an image of the Virgin Mary being taught to read by St. Anne, which is a lovely theme, and you don't see it very often. You see it in some medieval work, so I put that in. Underneath, runners, cross-country runners. The school are very keen on that, and they're running towards Jesus, reminding us that life is a sort of onward journey towards Christ. The summer term. In this term we see Christ central here. He breaks the bread and makes himself known to us, the chalice central. The disciples all around. And at the bottom, two Abingdon schoolboys in their lovely cerise ties. And they hold a plate to us and welcome us to sit at the table. They welcome the other boys to join them at the Eucharist. This little group of figures here are boys on a Duke of Edinburgh expedition in a little tent there and a fire. They are the disciples at the Ascension. And there is the cloud that hides the view from Christ risen. And above, martlets flying in the sky. Martlets, like swallows, a symbol of Abingdon School. And underneath, you can just make them out, cricket players. These two men are the men in white referred to in Acts 1, verse 10. Who were probably angels. And the boy in Abingdon, the cricketer in Abingdon colours, has just hit a 6, and the ball shoots across into this window up there. But at the same time, his bat points very clearly to Christ himself. Now, this window is sort of opposite the cricket pitch, and if I was a boy there, I know which window I'd want to hit the ball through, and it would be this one. So they fitted toughened glass on the back to protect the window. I'm sure they wouldn't want to do that, but it would be a fantastic hit if they did. On this side, we see the cricket ball, but it is also the moon turned to blood from Acts 2:20, where Peter quotes the prophecy of Joel. And underneath, the Good Samaritan, an example for all the boys. The chap here in stripy outfit carrying the other lad, the other person. When I showed my younger son at the time this design and asked him for feedback, he said, pointing to this, well, it looks like a typical Saturday night out, which is not what I was expecting to hear. Underneath, rowing. You see Abingdon very keen on their rowing, and they have this sort of fetching, stripy outfit. But it is also another reference to the river of life, the journey that we travel. And the final window for Abingdon was the most difficult one to design and to produce, but perhaps the one I was most happy with. It's the whole system, the whole design of the windows, as I said, a sort of a full colour monochrome. This last one, the services window. They wanted a window that was dedicated to boys and teachers, past and present, who'd served in the forces, who were still serving in the forces, who will serve in the forces. And so, after much debate, because they wanted a First World War uniform to start with, I said, no, it should be contemporary. It's always going to date. In 5 years' time, it'll be dated. But let's have a contemporary soldier. And so, there's a soldier here in sort of desert khakis or whatever, camouflage, holding a modern assault rifle. He's lowered it. He's at ease. His hat is on the floor. The wonderful military chap at the school said to me when he saw the design, oh no, you can't have hair that long. They don't have hair like that. It's all cut, and he sent me some photographs of boys at the school serving. And I found this wonderful photograph of this handsome young man sat on his tank with his hair blowing in the wind. And so I sent it back and said, that's fantastic, that's the one I'm going to use. His hair's like that. So I didn't change the design, I left it with his mop of hair. But the soldier looks up. He looks up to the cross made in the sky, a cross made by the vapour trail of a jet and a Spitfire. Okay, Spitfire doesn't give very good trail, and hopefully it hasn't been shot, but there is this cross in the sky. It is a reminder of the centurion looking up at the cross and saying, surely this was the Son of God. A plough on the ploughed field. That extraordinary moment where it said, swords will be turned to ploughshares. And on the other side, a single red poppy, the only colour on the window, a symbol of regeneration, of rebirth, of new life, and above a battleship. And so the three forces represented in this window. The second project I want to show you is a project I'm working on at the moment. I started about a year ago, and it should be finished in October. And it's a new window for Southall Minster in Nottinghamshire. Southall, this is I don't know if you all know this building, but it is the most glorious Romanesque building. It's vast, and it's set in this extraordinary little sort of parkland setting in this quite a small sort of market town of Southall. It's a lovely commission, but it was a very difficult one because I was asked to come up with a window that would commemorate the Great War. I mean, extremely difficult to try and come up with a design that acknowledged the sheer horror and waste of the Great War, but found in it some sort of redeeming hope and so, you know, good, and could point to God. So this is a picture of my design, and it's being made at the moment. It's quite a large window. It's probably as wide as one of these, the whole of that triptych there. And sort of half as, well, maybe a bit half as tall again as that. So it's quite a big panel. I wanted to talk you through the iconography. The blue sky, I hope you can see, I'm right in your way, aren't I? You'll have to sort of look around. The blue sky and the green fields of the English idyll are being blown away by the gathering storm clouds on the horizon. A single swallow, you can just see it there, symbol of carefree summer, circles and prepares to depart. A young girl drives a ploughshare, though the young men have already been called away. The earth is being torn apart by sharpened steel. Southall Minster, a symbol of stability, stands in the background. The summer colours are darkened by the storm of war brewing, when the world will be changed forever. The plough horse will become a horse of war, and the ploughshare will be turned into a sword. Beneath the ploughed field, we see miners at work. Bear in mind, this is the Cathedral of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, the centre of mining, or was. Perhaps soon they will become tunnels for a different reason, to undermine the enemy. Battle will be raged in the sky, on the sea, on land and beneath it. Brother will be set against brother. But at the heart of the design is an act of compassion and service to others. A group of soldiers gently lift an injured or perhaps dead comrade down into the relative safety of the trench. His outstretched arms hint of the crucifixion, as do his wounded feet and hands. This then is both a crucifixion and a deposition of Christ. Strands of barbed wire have become his crown of thorns. Although the soldiers crucified Christ through their actions, they are also crucified with him through their own sacrifice, at once crucifiers and crucified. Around the soldier being lifted down, we see the swirling cycle of war. Beneath there's a battleship. I put this in because it's actually HMS Canada. I wanted to put in some local references. This was the ship on which Captain Robert Sherlock from Oxton was midshipman in 1917. He went on to become Rear Admiral and was awarded the VC for his action in the Second War. He's a very important sailor and famous in the area. To the left, a soldier scrambles out of the trench, climbing up a ladder, the ladder hinting at the crucifixion. And in the sky above, planes are dogfighting. One of them is a Newport Scout, flown by Captain Albert Ball, probably the most famous pilot of the Great War, so the English pilot. And he died mysteriously. We don't know why he died, but he was very young when he died. But he'd been credited with 44 victories. His most renowned enemy, von Richthofen, said of when he heard of Ball's death, he was by far the best English flying man. I didn't remember it, if you remember, but some years ago, I remember on the local TV, there was a lovely story about Richthofen's family had come over to pay his bill at Ducker's shoe shop, because Richthofen had studied here, and he hadn't squared up with his shoe bill. So the family came over to settle up, and well, they weren't duly sent packing, but they said, no, that's fine, that's been settled, thank you. What a wonderful story. To the right of the figures, we see a crocodile of soldiers, blinded by gas, stumbling back to the trenches, the blind leading the blind. To the forefront, a young soldier helping another whose eyes are bandaged. The soldier helping his blinded comrade is the Good Samaritan. It reminds me also of Simon of Cyrene, helping Christ carry his cross. What you did for the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. And yet in the middle of all this destruction, new life returns. Once again, I use the icon of the red poppy. The red poppy and the moon above represent for me the body and blood of Christ. It is as if this becomes then a sort of flowering rood. Beneath the central group of figures, we see a woman hanging up the washing, blown by the gathering storm, probably a jolly good drying day. She is the symbol of the other half of the equation from the soldier's perspective behind the scenes. The women, and I know some women were involved in fighting, but the women that remained and all the others that remained at home, trying to keep some vestige of normality, supporting and empowering the war effort through their galvanised work, made sacrifices. This is also Mary at the foot of the cross. The white sheet is Christ's winding sheet, and she lifts her arms up to Christ as he's being lifted down from the cross. But it's also as if she reaches out to these two lads here. And I had it in my mind when I designed this. The window that it sits next to is a commemoration of two young boys, two young men who were killed, two brothers. They were killed on the same day. And so I wanted to put these figures in sort of reference to them. What was extraordinarily moving was the fact that the boys were killed with the same ages as my own boys as are now. In the top pocket of one of these men will be a little bit of glass with a bit of writing on, and it hints to a postcard that was sent from the priest in charge of the Minster in 1916. The card, it won't say this on the glass, but I'll just read out what it said on the postcard because I found this very moving. Dear friend, December 16. This card takes to you wheresoever you may be my best Christmas and New Year wishes. It is of the little war chapel we have fitted up in the Minster. The list of names of all those who have left this parish to serve is, as you see, decorated with flags, surmounted by the crucifix, to remind us all how human suffering is shared by Jesus Christ, and how he saved us by his own death from the eternal consequences of sin. On the table are some well-known pictures and some flowers. The flowers are kept fresh by children or by someone who has lost their husband, and being unable to put flowers on his grave far away, places them here instead of in memory of him. Here prayer is said every day by children or by others for you. So you are not forgotten. May Christmas bring us all some better hope of peace and goodwill, and help us to trust in him who came from heaven to earth, so as to lead us from earth to heaven. Your minister in the Lord, W.J. Conybeare. What a lovely postcard. I hope it was well received by the soldiers, and I just thought it was a lovely link to put that in. And so probably no one will ever realise what it is except you when you see this finished window. The pigeon is a carrier pigeon, and on it carries the message INRI. The soldier beneath holding this wounded soldier, they make a Trinity. Above them, we see soldiers on leave, or perhaps they're celebrating the end of hostilities. One man breaks bread, while others look on. The time of want has become a time of plenty. A British soldier embraces a German soldier as brother. The cup of suffering has become a mug of beer, raised in celebration of life everlasting. Even the sniper in his tower, and it seems the snipers were the most hated, like Zacchaeus in his tree, is called by Christ to the meal, as are the conscientious objectors. And at the top of the design, an angel calls the reveille on a bugle, for this is the resurrection. The window celebrates the sacrifices made by so many at home and abroad. It honours all who served in the forces, those who gave their lives, those who returned, as well as those whose conscience forbade them to take up arms. It honours all at home, who struggled to maintain some sort of order in their damaged lives, and those whose work, whether farming, fishing or the factory, kept the country going. It speaks of great sadness, but perhaps even greater love. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. It acknowledges the darkness of despair and loss of life, as well as for many, the loss of faith. But it hints ultimately that it is through selfless sacrifice and service to others that the darkness of despair is turned into the light of hope. And so finally, thinking back to that image of the shimmering reflections on the water's surface that I mentioned earlier, perhaps it is that once we can see both the shimmering surface and what's underneath, we truly see. Then when we look into each other's faces, we will see not only the appearance of each other, but the image of Christ. This sculpture, Veronica wipes the brow of Jesus. Veronica, meaning the true image. Usually depictions of this theme, we see the image of Christ in the cloth. But when I carved this, I realised I had to leave that blank. Because the true image of Christ is Veronica herself. As St. Catherine says, Christ has no hands but yours. We see beyond the glimmering reflection of Veronica's face, and we see Christ himself. Thank you.
If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please indicate and I will come with the microphone.
I'd just like to ask when the window will be finished. We're working on at the moment.
I'm not superstitious. It should be October, hopefully. It should be installed in October. I'm not sure when. Hopefully the end of October. Yes, I hope you will.
Well, you've just preempted my question, Gillian, which is, would you mind if the group came to see it?
I'd be delighted. I'd be happy to come up and...
It's just a completely random question.
No, I'd be delighted.
As a straw poll, hands up who would come if I organised some transport. At least a minibus, by the looks of it.
I must just tell you this anecdote. Like a great friend of mine, Tom Denny, who's a fantastic glass artist, some friends of mine, Roger Wagner, who painted that lovely painting there, and some other friends who work on the same themes. We went with Tom to see his window, the Traherne window in Hereford. And it's worth seeing if you haven't seen it, because it's quite low down. And so unlike the wonderful Durham window he did, which is high up, this one you can get really close to, and you can see the beautiful technique and the colour. It's a fabulous window. I think it's my favourite of his. Anyway, we went into this little chapel to see the window. It was packed, full of tourists, and we couldn't get near it. But we listened, and the guide was talking about Tom Denny and the window and what he meant. And I said to Tom, "Did you know any of this?" And he said, "Well, not most of it actually. It was really interesting." And like me, he was, he sort of take it on board and use it for himself next time and not credit that it came from somebody else. Anyway, when they'd left, we went in and Tom talked about the window and we looked at the detail. And then some of the tourists realised what was going on, and they came in behind and they sort of listened over, and I think they sort of realised that this was actually the artist talking. So it was an extraordinary moment in time when we always assume that artists are dead, but actually they might be just behind you, so you have to be really careful. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Rosie.
Thank you. Love the windows. Could you say a little bit more about how your painting or design gets translated with the layers of glass?
Yes.
Fusion, right?
Yes.
It sounds fascinating.
Yes.
I'd just like to know more about it.
Yes. So how the design gets transferred to glass?
Yeah.
Well, with the Abingdon windows, like I said, they're fused glass. And that's a great skill, working with fused glass. So what I did is finished paintings, quite large finished paintings, and then they were given to the glass artist and the glass company, and they would make sections of them and try and copy the glass. And at that point, all I did was to appear, look in the kiln and say, "Oh dear, it's the wrong colour," or "Can we redo that?" And sometimes, and the beauty of glass is that it changes obviously in the kiln. It's like watercolour, that you drop it into the water and something happens, and it's either wonderful or it isn't. But when it is wonderful, it's great. And so that my job was just watching to see what came out of the kiln. The great technical skill was the glass makers. The window for Southall is being made in a sort of more traditional technique of leaded glass. So the pieces of glass are painted. What I've done is I did a full-size drawing, which is huge, so big I couldn't even get it in the studio. It was rolled up. Full-size cartoon, and then the glass chaps cut the glass. We worked together to pick the glass colours, and at the moment they're painting it, and all I will do probably is paint sections of it that I think are important. There's elements of it that I want my hand on, but realistically, if they do a better job and I look at it, I have no pride in that sense. For me, what matters is the work. And so that's why my work is not signed. It doesn't matter. It's the work that matters. And so, then they basically copy what my painting is. But it's when you scale up, you do a painting this big, and then you see it vast. It is. And also, when you see it in the studio, when you take it and you put it into your church or cathedral or wherever, the light changes it. So you have to try and recreate the same light, the same position, so you get an idea of and even what's behind it. And of course, like sculpture, if it's going up here, then you've got to bear that in mind, because it's one thing designing something here and producing it there, and then when it's installed, it's up there.
It rather reminds me of icon painting.
Yes.
Writing that you pray before you do anything, and the work is transformed into these groups of heaven, as if something is the other vehicle.
Yes.
Is that
yes, I think so. I mean, I don't analyse it really, I just do it. But I imagine that, I think that is the case. It's a sort of, what I really enjoy is the process of doing the work. It's not the work at the end of it. It's not seeing the finished glass, it's not seeing the finished sculpture. It's the process of doing it that I find it is like prayer. And it can be very moving. So, for instance, when you're carving, you arrive at things slowly, and when you're feeling, it sounds really sort of corny, but when you're carving a corpus of Christ, you do get moments when you feel extraordinary pain. And when I've carved mother and child, sometimes the sort of poignancy that Mary might have felt when she didn't quite know what was going to happen, but knew that there was something special about Jesus and that there was some dark in the future maybe, that sense you feel as the artist making that piece. And that's the joy of art, is that you get these sort of insights, if you like, through the process of making the art. Sorry, that didn't really answer the question.
Sorry, I'm just wondering whether, I don't know how to express that, whether you have to be religious to express a feeling or to convey the feeling.
I don't know. It's a very interesting question, whether you have to be religious to produce his work. I mean,
Sorry, I continue because I'm Spanish, and I always think of Picasso with the Guernica.
Yes.
And he was a communist.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody who sees that mural, it conveys the suffering, especially the suffering of the people.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's something that came to my mind.
It's an interesting point. I don't know what the answer is. I think I'm tempted to say you don't have to be religious in the same way. I don't know much about Caravaggio, but he produces some fantastic religious art. And some art speaks to people and has a sort of a sacred quality about it that people can, that speaks to people, and that it may have come from an artist that may not see that themselves or feel that themselves. On the other hand, quite often if you're working in things that are going to be used liturgically, it's very helpful to have an understanding and a sort of comprehension and a faith that then comes through the work. But I always remember, and I've quoted this lots of times, talking to somebody who said to me, well, I'm not religious, but people often say that, and I just take that with a pinch of salt, but they said, I'm not religious, but I was employed to carve the body of Christ, because I'm a wood carver, and when I carved that body of Christ, I felt the pain of the crucifixion. Now, from somebody who isn't religious, he'd felt that through his chisel, through the action, and so maybe you don't need to be religious, but
the Christ of Dali. Sublime.
It is, and it's still that image, that St. John of the Christ of St. John of the Cross, still probably more than any other religious image, speaks to people in a very deep way. I said this before. The Sea and Salvation exhibition, many years ago at the National Gallery. That was the work, I think, that seemed to speak to most people. Only in the sense that there was always a big crowd of people just gawping at it silently. It's the same painting that I saw when I was about 10 years old in Glasgow, or wherever it lives most of the time. And it just cut me to the quick, like Simeon sword to the heart.
As if you're saying that the artist and the work is one thing, and then when it's done,
yes,
somebody else will look at it and perhaps see what you've seen, or perhaps see something more than you've seen.
Yes, quite often. I mean, the thing is with work, you often produce it thinking you're doing something, and then quite often something else will happen in the process. But then somebody else will come along and they will respond to it in a completely different way. And often you'll think, you know, like I said before, I wish I'd thought of that. And often children, you know, out of the mouths of babes, will say things that are so profound that they've seen in the work. I remember, actually, it was in Oxford when the collection of the Methodist collection of paintings came to, was it in Oxford? I can't remember. Yes, it was in Oxford. And I've got a painting in there. And school children came in and they responded to the paintings. They did little copies. And then the teacher said, well, would I come and speak to the children? I went in, I spoke to the children. And then I was shocked. I looked at several paintings that were versions of my painting. And it really shocked me because one of the children had got the colour that I'd wanted in the sky. And when I said to the teacher about that, they thought I was being sort of polite and having a bit of fun. But I wasn't. I was absolutely, well, mortified. My human nature recoiled because that was precisely the colour that I'd wanted. I hadn't quite got. It was only when I saw it I realised that kid had got it. Yeah. So I don't know where that came from. What was the question again?
I was trying to express that sometimes the work takes on.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it does.
You'll know Owen came last week.
Oh yes.
He spoke to us.
Yes.
Too was wonderful and blessing. And one of the things he did is he talked about people telling their story. Someone in a group or an individual hearing the story and then retelling it.
Yes.
So that the person whose story it was, in the key. And the way that's what you're saying is
yes.
that it's one of the many things you're saying, that as we have a privilege of looking at a piece of art, it speaks to us, I mean, perhaps helps the artist in the sense of the blue of the sky, but it's the same.
Yes, it is.
It's the dialogue, isn't it, between the person trying to express and then being attentively heard.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. I remember him saying the importance of story, and his story becoming his story, and his story becoming our story.
Yeah.
Anybody else have to make a comment?
Very interesting conversation. Reminds me of the Blake quotation. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear as it is, infinite.
Yes.
And I think maybe it's that sort of thing that when we perceive properly.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, and that's absolutely, I really like that.
And the second line, which is never quoted, is something, I can't remember it well, it's something like, for man has closed himself up and sees only through narrow chinks of his own cavern.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's amazing.
And I think that's that is never quoted, wasn't at the Ashmolean.
It's brilliant. If I could write that, I wouldn't have had to do all this work. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think that's what's extraordinary. You know, I said to George that you basically do what you can do. And it might not be very good, but you just do your best. And, you know, whether it's art or music, you know, and as an artist, you always look to writers or well, I think they do anyway. I look to musicians and I think, how could anybody do that? It's an extraordinary gift. And to actually, to be able to do that, and to be able to write those words that so succinctly sum up what it is I'm trying to do with a whole lifetime of work, trying to say what Blake said in 10 words. Well, thank you for that.
It's good to remember that creativity is a gift from God as the Creator. There is something in all of us.
Yes.
If we can try to express it.
Yeah.